This podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not medical or legal advice. Always follow your local policies, procedures, and protocols when functioning in your respective profession. Additionally, the views expressed by the speakers and owners of this podcast are their own and do not represent the views of their respective employers. Listener discretion is advised.
Alert Medic 1 response.
Ken, Josh, and Mustafa here. Welcome back to the Alert Medic 1 podcast. Okay, so hi everybody, welcome back to the Alert Medic 1 podcast. Today you got me, you got Moose, and we've got our guest, Okayest Mike Carunchio.
Hello.
I'm from Delaware, virtually. And Mike, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself, even though probably most people know who you are that follow us as well.
I'm Mike. I've got the world's Okayest medic podcast. I work full time as I call it a real medic in Pennsylvania in a single medic chase car. And then my other job is I'm a flight medic. I was a flight medic for 10 years, did it full time for most of that, and then decided to keep it real and go back to the street full time. So here I am.
I got to ask about your system that you work in. So your single medic chase crews, that's a lot of what I do still PRN. So how does that work? Like, are your ambulances like paid, volunteer? Like, how's that work?
The standard in the area is they're mostly paid crews, but they're employees of volunteer fire departments, which I don't exactly understand, but that's what they do.
We fully understand. We come from a county that was the standard up until 7 months ago.
Exactly. Yeah, and certainly in the past few months is where this done a drastic change of gone to almost completely paid to the point where volunteer departments are voting out their EMS leadership, which is interesting. Yeah, very interesting.
I'll just keep it there. I'm not a fan of the politics.
Yeah. It certainly gets interesting. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'll be the first one to say I've started as a volunteer. I'm still a volunteer, but it certainly there's realities that aren't conducive to best practice when it comes to medicine. So I think we can all agree there. So, Josh, go ahead, bud.
So thanks, Mike, for coming on. So when we were arranging this, we were trying to figure out a topic, and just coincidentally, Mike posted a post about Esmolol and its use in recurrent refractory vfib and pulseless vtach. And how there is research, but there's not a whole lot of data there. And that coincided with Moose telling me that there is a protocol change coming sometime in the future in Maryland, possibly. It's not been totally voted on yet, but it is in the proposal process of adding Esmolol and making some changes to our pulseless vtach and vfib algorithm in the realm of Esmolol, electrical delivery, and how much FP we're going to be giving these patients. So, thought what a great topic to talk about because it might be coming to the streets here in Maryland, which is a lot of our audience, but also could be making its way around the nation soon in other jurisdictions. So, Mike, you want to lead off with the studies that you found that prompted the post and what brought it about for you?
Yeah, well, what brought it about for me is I'm a whacker. I usually am listening to the radio on downtime at work. Everybody makes fun of me for it. And I listened to a radio report to the hospital, and it's this 30-some-year-old dialysis patient who they've shocked like 480 times. It's refractory vfib. And they said, we've given Esmolol. And this was a program not in my jurisdiction. I was like, Esmolol? Like, why the hell would you give Esmolol for vfib? And I sort of remembered hearing something about that before. So I looked it up, and sure enough, Esmolol for vfib. The thought is that, hold on, I'm pulling my stuff up here. The thought is that in a VFib state, especially a refractory VFib state, you have this catecholamine surge that is making the heart irritable, and the heart's dying, so it starts to fib. I'm doing like a hand motion, but it's not like people can see this. It starts to fibrillate. And if you give a beta blocker, you know that beta 1 is cardiac stimulation, cardiac output. It's going to reduce the force of contraction. It's going to reduce the rate, and it's going to reduce the electrical dromotropy. I can't think of the definition off the top of my head, but if you reduce that sympathetic stimulation, you might just get the heart to start beating better. Now, I have to ask before we proceed, if we're worried about the sympathetic stimulation worsening the VFib, why are we giving a beta blocker and we're giving epi every 3 to 5 minutes?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's certainly a good point. Yeah, for the Maryland, and we'll get into this a little bit, for the Maryland protocol proposal specifically, it's one time that you give it. If the patient, epinephrine, I should say, 1 milligram. If they rearrest and then you get ROSC, you can give up to 1 additional dose. After ROSC, if they rearrest, you can give 1 additional dose. But certainly, I get your point. You're kind of like, what is it? Putting your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time.
Correct. I'm not opposed to the whole 1 milligram one time. I recommend everybody listen to it. I like the guy, Corey Slovis. He's a medical director for, I want to say Nashville or Memphis. I've been listening to him for eons, and he was on the Resus X. Do you guys follow Critical Care Now, Haney Malamat?
I think I've seen it, and I know who you're talking about. I just listened to your recent episode on the way home tonight. And
okay.
I need to Slovis for my commute the next.
Yeah, Haney's phenomenal. He's actually a doc at the hospital where my flight team is. But anyway, he has this conference. It's a virtual conference, and being foam ed, he posts the lectures on YouTube. So Corey Slovis gave this lecture. I think everybody should watch it. It's only like 18 minutes. It's very to the point, which is why I like him. And he goes over drugs in cardiac arrest. And he said that in non-shockable rhythms, epinephrine does increase survival, which kind of goes against what you've been hearing for a while, that, epinephrine doesn't increase survival. It increases ROSC, but not out of hospital survival. But in non-shockable rhythms, the research he put out there, and I have no reason to think he's lying because he's great, that in non-shockable rhythms, epi is a good go-to. Now, he does say, if you're giving 7, 8 epis and they remain asystolic or in PEA, they're dead. But I like the 1 milligram dose. He did say, however, that in shockable rhythms, epi is associated with worse neurologic outcomes. So you do get ROSC at higher rates, but the neurologic, you basically made a vegetable, and that's not good for anybody.
Yeah, and with your question, Mike, so, prepping for this today while I'm sitting adjuncting, and I'm sitting next to one of my partners for my shift, and he's like, Esmolol. He's like, I think I've heard of that before. And he, does a quick stat pearls look at it, and, he's like, man, this is great. It's used for all these things. And you get to contraindications. Bullet 3, don't use with epi, norepi, or dobutamine, or dopamine. And it's like,
now, is that a drug interaction thing, or is that like a compatibility in the lines thing?
I think it was a drug interaction. And so it's like, so we're going to give Esmolol. Now, granted, we're giving way less epi than before, in this proposed algorithm. But then our post-ROSC package right now in the state includes epi. As in epidrapic, we have hypertension. And next year is going to involve levofeb, both which are going to be working against something that we possibly just recently gave in our chain of care, because it is late in the game for our algorithm. So it's like, where is this, like Moose said, where is this balance between that brake and the gas pedal at the same time? So
yeah, definitely. I could see them putting that a contraindication is with epi or norepi, simply I don't know. I'm just speculating here, simply to prevent somebody from erroneously giving the medication. Because if let's look at not cardiac arrest. Let's say you have an ICU patient, they're in septic shock, and you've got them on an epinephrine drip and a levo drip to vasoconstrict and keep their blood pressure up. And somebody notes that their heart rate is like 130 and they're an AFib, or their heart rate is 140 and it's sinus tach, and they're going, oh my god, I got to slow that heart rate, let me give Esmolol. Well, the intensivist is going to want to shoot you for giving something that's going to counteract the pressors that are trying to maintain a blood pressure. That's just my speculation. But yeah, I think you're definitely onto something. As you said before, the data does kind of suck. The data's promising, but I BS'd my way through statistics in grad school and in college. So I'd be lying if I told you I was able to like crunch the numbers and really be able to speak fluently on the statistical analysis in these studies. But they say that they're not statistically significant, and that they were, as you said, Josh, very, very small study populations. And also they were retrospective. They were going back and looking at patients got Esmolol. It wasn't a double-blind randomized control trial, which all the EBM nerds say is the gold standard. And I say that jokingly. It is the gold standard. But yeah, there is a scarcity of data to support it. I'd like to see them, this is just my fantasy world, do a study where they only give one epi or completely take epi out and just give the Esmolol and see how that works.
Yeah, so the paper you guys are talking about is from 2022 by Patrick et al. And it was the two arms, hold on, I'm pulling it up right now. I believe it was 63 patients in the, 63 patients who received Esmolol versus 70 patients. And it's interesting because it was a protocol change. So the 70 patients were prior to the protocol change. And although it did show a higher rates of ROSC in the Esmolol group of 38% versus 24%, this did not reach statistical significance, and that's huge. And without going into, well, no, never mind. We'll just leave it there.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
It just, to me, I didn't really, it's just not there. The evidence isn't there. It's just interesting to me. I mean, I'm not saying it's not, I'll be interested in seeing how it goes from here, at least in Maryland.
And specifically in the protocol, it does state that it's going to be 100% review all EMS operational medical. So every county, their medical directors have to 100% review any chart that involves Esmolol, that involves DSED, double sequential defibrillation, and I'm not sure about vector change, maybe vector change, because that is part of this. But we've been doing that here in my agency for about a year.
Vector change?
Yep.
Okay. Have you guys? We don't do any of that in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is probably one of the least progressive. I shouldn't say that, but it's one of the least progressive EMS states in the country. Thank God we got rid of the dinosaur medical director who took the philosophy that, it's my job, literally said it's my job to protect the public from EMS. There's freaking leadership there. And we got somebody who's very pro-paramedic, very progressive, and wants to institute a whole bunch of changes, but it's just navigating through the red tape.
Yeah, Dr. Bledsoe, right?
Yeah. I've never met the guy. A lot of guys in the next county over in Lancaster County speak extremely highly of him, and I've never heard someone say anything bad about him. So I trust my colleagues in Lancaster County, and if they vouch for him, I'm willing to give him the fair shake and the chance.
Yeah.
Not to go off on a tangent.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you're good.
I was just going to say, that's a really long-winded way of saying that we don't do double sequential defib or vector change where I am yet. Anyway,
what I was going to say was, I hope that we're hearing the last, death rattles of this, generation of medical director that just doesn't trust the people that they're helping oversee. I hope we're seeing the last of it. because certainly here in Maryland, I think we're blessed for the most part for having medical directors that are, a lot of them being prior EMS, or folks that are certainly vested in their programs to the point where they care about the folks and often have very good professional relationships with them, and see the benefit of having a paramedic that functions at the top of their license, right? So yeah, no, that's crazy to me that up until very recently, Pennsylvania had was it a state medical director, I guess?
State medical director.
Yeah, that's a shame. That's a shame.
Yeah, he was an EMT before. I honestly think that he got bullied by a bunch of paramedics when he was a 18-year-old EMT, and then became a doctor and was like, "I'll show them." But
yeah.
So, have you had success with the vector changes? New Jersey's starting that.
So I personally have had one success, and I kind of talked to you a little bit about that via DMs. It was also a CPRIC, so CPR induced consciousness, pacing, ketamine. It was a witness to rest. It was a STEMI transport that coded in front of the first medic. I was the second medic, and it was a whole, like, doing everything that we're supposed to do by the book. Stop, work the guy, then go from there, instead of this old way of doing things. Even Moose probably came in at the point where we were still hanging on to the top rail and pushing with one hand.
Oh yeah, I physically have done that. Yeah,
I think we've all done that too many times, and now looking back, regrettably too many times. And so we did vector change. He was vfib from the start. We just knew, we're like, hey, let's just set it up, because we know after 3 you're going to need to do this. And we did manual compressions all the way up till we did our vector change shocks, and then we put on the Lucas after that. But it was after the fourth one that we had the induced consciousness. You got ketamine, had a fifth shock, and then we had a wide bradycardic that we paced. Ended up having a fully neurointact discharge 2 weeks after the event. He got a total of about an hour plus of CPR. And the doc's like, that's what happens when you perfuse the brain for an hour. And so, yeah, it was a crazy, crazy call all around, but great outcome, and really enforced the fundamentals of what we're supposed to do. Good compressions, appropriate defibrillation, and the appropriate application of the right medications at the right times. So
yeah. I mean,
countywide,
going back to the what'd you say?
Countywide, I don't know the data. I know it's been done at other times, but I don't know what our ROSC and neurointact from vector change is.
Yeah, it looks like the vector change is better than the dual sequential defibrillation. I've got something pulled up here from one of the EM blogs, and it talked about how there's a paucity of data. Just like the Esmolol, the data's not that great. There's not a ton of it, but it is promising in vector change. However, they write that double sequential defibrillation probably does not really do anything. They said they found no benefit with a statistically non-significant trend towards harm. So, I don't know.
Interesting. What's their? Do you have their citation?
Yeah,
I'll look it up real quick.
Ross 26.
Because Texas, the dose VF trial found double sequential has better ROSC and neurointact than vector change.
Oh, really? So, I'm not familiar with that study.
Yeah. So Dr. Texas out of Vancouver, he's in Canada. They did a study that started before COVID. It got interrupted by COVID, and they had to stop the study, so they didn't get the full catchment that they wanted. They got like 400 patients out of that. They split it into 3 arms. One was standard placement of pads, one was vector change pads, and one was DSED. And the numbers are promising. I know which study you're talking about, Mike, because I remember 2016, that's when I was coming out of paramedic school, And I remember hearing about it. I think Wake County was doing it because Wake County was super progressive back in the mid 2010s, and I'm sure they still are. And they were doing it, but all the data was like, oh, it's the same. It's the same ROSC. It's the same neurotech as we're getting already. And I think it was just like it was a super small patient population for it. They didn't get a whole lot of people in it. And even this one, the dose VF trial, one of the arguments is that it was stopped by COVID. So they didn't get their full numbers. So like, is it a truly good representation? Like what would have happened if I think they were shooting for 1,000 between 3 hospital centers and like 4 or 5 agencies in Canada.
Okay.
So I can read the summary here. By Sheldon Cheskis in New England Journal of Medicine 2022. So basically a cluster randomized trial that they did over 6 Canadian paramedic services. I'll just read off the results real quick. A total of 405 patients were enrolled before the Data and Safety Monitoring Board stopped the trial because of the coronavirus pandemic. A total of 136 patients, which is 33.6%, were assigned to receive standard defib versus 144 were assigned, that's 35.6%, to receive vector change defibrillation, and 125 to receive dual sequential defibrillation. Survival to hospital discharge was more common in the dual sequential DSED group, I'm going to have to say that 10 times fast, than in the standard group, 30.4% versus 13.3%, and more common in the VC group than in the standard group. Dual sequential defibrillation, but not vector change defibrillation, was associated with a higher percentage of patients having a good neurological outcome than standard defibrillation. So pretty interesting. Certainly pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to read that.
Yeah, it was. It dropped right after the new. I want to say it dropped in like March of this year. My agency, one of the chiefs, ran into him at a conference. Was like, "Oh, I love this," and we did a clinical practice guideline change and introduced it. But yeah, I mean, it's. I know we've kind of gone off of Esmolol and but it's still in the real wheelhouse of cardiac arrest. And it's crazy to see the changes that are coming. Mike, you definitely. I'm not gonna say you definitely, but you predate me in EMS. I predate Moose.
I predate everybody. It seems like I'm getting old, man.
But the changes that we've seen, we talked about. We used to do one-handed CPR hanging from the rafters of the ambulance. Our main goal in cardiac arrest, it seemed like, was how do we get them out of the house? It wasn't how do we perform good compressions. And through studies like Dose VF, through Resuscitation Academy, through all these different avenues, we found that there's things that actually do work really well. And even in that, then we see some slightly controversial things. So I know, Mike, you have loved to talk about heart and airways and Dr. Wang, and how that study, when it came out, it was just, earth shattering for so many medics out there thinking, you're going to take my tube out of my hands. You can't pry it out of my cold, dead hands, in the words of Charlton Heston, but it's like, no, we're just looking, hey, this is a different approach. How does this work? And now we're finding out, hey, maybe the supraglottics that is suggesting isn't great in certain types of arrest. The ones that are going to get ECMO end up not having good outcomes when they start with an SGA compared to the ET arm. And it's crazy to see where things are constantly shifting, and that's kind of like this thing with Esmolol. Esmolol, these studies said, hey, it might work, but it's not statistically significant, but there's a chance. So is it going to do good things when we implement it? We're going to have to find out.
Yeah, exactly. Since you brought up PART, I'm pulling up my stuff on PART and the Airways or Airways 2 trial, whichever one it is. If you look at the numbers, here we go. If you look at the numbers, I think that they oversold how good SGAs how good they think SGAs are. So if you look at the data in Airways crap, I don't have it off the top of my hand, but it was something like 15 versus 18%, which, yes, I understand, like nerd statistics, that's statistically significant, but passing the bullshit test, you kind of got to wonder, is that really a huge thing? And also, there wasn't that much difference between survival and neuro outcomes between intubation and SGA. Now, that being said, I have been on, and old medic Mike has been a participant on plenty of cardiac arrests where it's, all right, stop compressions. I got to get this tube. I got to get a good visual. And it's, you delay everything else to get this damn tube, which in the grand scheme of things, in like 99 out of 100 cardiac arrests, is not going to save the patient's life. So as much as it pains me to say, do we need to be intubating all of our cardiac arrests? I don't think so. I think that we will get laser focused on that tube. Now, if you have good pit crew CPR and you have good resources and you have someone that can keep the compressions going and minimize all that and, use good crew resource management, if you get somebody that's good at intubating and they can drop a tube while all this is going on, then yeah, I mean, by all means, do it. But yeah, I think that you could make, I feel like I'm rambling here, but I feel like you could make an argument for both sides. Yeah, I think that there should be a de-emphasis on intubation, but I don't think that, SGAs are the answer. And you brought up this Minneapolis study that came out this year. It was, if people aren't familiar with it, it was they looked at patients that were being delivered to this one particular university hospital to get ECPR, ECMO CPR with VA ECMO. And the patients that were a candidate for VA ECMO, they had much worse ABGs, lactates, so much so. And I thought this was pretty significant that they put in the study, they put in the words asphyxial physiology, and then they put it in the title. So that's pretty damning. Now, our medical director at Impact EMS, Sal Rezai, he's fantastic. And he's like this guy, he could talk your ear off about this stuff for the next 12 hours, and he'd be interesting to listen to the whole time. He says it's an interesting study, but he's like, this is one study. This is one specific patient population of patients that are going to be getting ECMO. You can't just say that SGAs are not good. And he's got a point. But being a paramedic who is not a fan of Henry Wang, I like to throw a bone to these people in Minneapolis.
It's interesting you say that. So part of the protocol change that's going to be like Josh said earlier, not confirmed yet, but if passed by the EMS board, is ECPR, and it'll be the inclusion criteria. There's a certain amount of inclusion criteria, but one of them is being 15 minutes within an ECPR capable facility. Yeah, go ahead.
The other criteria is an advanced airway, but it doesn't specify SGA or ET.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. No, you're fine. Yeah. So, and it's interesting. I will say this from not to call either of you guys old, because I just turned 30, so I guess I'm not that old, that young
I'm 41,
either.
so
yeah. So,
let's put the difference here.
I gotta say, I have seen a change from the folks that I used to ride with. Some of the folks, I should say, not Ken, when I was in paramedic school, versus the people that are now riding with me. Certainly, there has been a de-emphasis in ET tubes. Certainly, that, and so I think there's a generational thing there. I like what you said, Mike, about taking a step back from the ET tubes. I think we would all agree. Certainly, we have to take a step back, period, and just think of these. Whether it's a cardiac arrest or a STEMI patient, take an approach from a clinical management standpoint and try to take a step back, period. I think a lot of times, whether it's an EMT or a paramedic who's just sending the entire volume of a BVM in, or it's someone that's just, hey, stop compressions real quick so I can get this tube, or any number of like bad medicine things. Yeah, it's just bad juju. I just I've certainly one of our executive director at MIMS presented on I forget what his topic was on, but basically one of the things he identified is supraglottic airways are not harmless. You know, a lot of the adverse events that are occurring are because of poor placement, or placement is fine, they're just not doing the job effectively. So
There's one.
Go ahead.
6 failures are underreported and approach 6% in optimal operating suite settings.
Mike, when's the last time you worked in an optimal operating room setting?
Yeah, not even.
Yeah. I mean, my last tube was less than a week ago. It was on a cluttered bedroom floor that I had to shove random stuff out of the way just to get to the head. In a poorly lit room that luckily my driver brought the giant spotlight that sits, in one of the compartments on the engine to light up the room. It was lit like an operating room after that point, but that was about it.
Yeah. Moose, I like you bringing up the de-emphasis on intubation, on all skills that that don't have value, but that aren't the priority or could be harmful. It wasn't a code yet, but I had a woman last week. Police had a check on the welfare call. They kicked down the door. I posted about it. She ended up having a gangrenous colostomy, and she's the one I literally puked twice on the call. It was awful. I felt bad for this poor lady because she was dying. She's alone. She was tracking. She was unresponsive, but she was tracking with her eyes, and she was kind of softly moaning. So I do think she was aware of what was going on, and she's laying there, and we cut her clothes off, and we all were like, like puking everywhere. I felt bad for her, but she's got a shock index like hugely high. She's got a blood pressure of 50 systolic, and I was telling my paramedic student, we had a 45-minute transport to the hospital from where we are, and I told my student, 10 years ago, we would have murdered this patient because we would have been like, she's unresponsive. She's not protecting her airway. A comes before everything else. We got to tube her. So you push a sedative. You're going to knock out her sympathetic drive. And let's say you just did it without drugs. Let's say you just raw dogged the tube, which you totally could have done with her.
Which certainly people used to do. Yeah.
You start pushing air via positive pressure ventilation, you're increasing the intrathoracic pressure and you're compressing the vena cava, and you're going to tank her blood pressure that way. So as much as I wanted to tube her, and on paper, she needed to be intubated, no doubt about it, jumping right to that as the priority was not the way to go.
Yeah, it's been echoed over and over again lately on social media and in CE and FOMED and everywhere. Lindsay talked about it very blatantly when the first time she came out with it, but resuscitate before you innovate, resuscitate before you do anything. Like, there's so many other things like that. You need to make sure that the patient is a viable candidate for these high level interventions. So that time, and if we don't, as my instructor said today, I think you said it, Mike. I think Moose, you said it too. We've all said it. Prepare for the clean kill, because that's what you're going to do.
Yep.
And that's not our business. Our business is attempting to stabilize and get to a level of care, because at times there is much more that the ICU and a surgical suite can do that is going to help some of these patients. Mike, in your case, I think you said there wasn't much that was going to help this patient in the end because of what was found. Ultimately, So it's one of those things, like taking a step back. Once again, take a step back and realize what the patient truly needs in the time, and not what is the cool skill, what is the aggressive skill. We talked about this, I think, almost a year ago. Measured aggressiveness. Like, don't be aggressive just to be aggressive. Figure out what's going to be best and use it appropriately.
Yeah, from my perspective as a flight medic, I go on scene flights, and there are plenty of times where they have RSI'd a patient and they give me the report and what they found. And my partner and I are like, why the hell did they intubate this person? And I look back, 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, I would have probably been that medic who was dropping the tube because, got to be aggressive, got to secure the airway, secure them for transport. As my medical director on the flight team said, he used to be a medic. He was like, he goes, the thing that's great about medicine is that it's always evolving. He said, but the thing that sucks about that is you realize how many people you killed as it's evolving. I was like, that's pretty profound.
I said it to the class today. I was like, look, I got another 20 years of it now. I know when I'm going to retire. And you guys probably have about the same amount of time as a medic if you stay a medic the whole time. The things you're going to see us change into are crazy. Things that we're going to discount that we're talking about today. In the next 20 years, it's going to happen. And just wait for this water out. And not to mention, Moose, I think you said it once. I can't remember who said it. Someone once said, like, how fast medical research turns into actual, like, patient care. It, like, takes, like, 5 years or something like that.
Yeah, 5 to 10 years, from initial concepts,
But that has changed. It's getting quicker.
Exactly, yeah.
Quicker by the minute, essentially. The things that all three of us did, you and me, Mike, because I'm started in 2007. I know you were 4 or 5 years prior to that, Mike, and
me 02.
The things that we did back then that we would never touch now.
Two large 4 IVs wide open
until they bleed clear, right? I've heard the horror stories. So the quote, Josh, that was mentioned, and I'm trying to remember the exact quote, was one of the Mayo brothers, one of the physicians said that, and I'm blanking on the quote, but basically he said that the total knowledge of medicine has gotten to the point where no one physician can get to have all the knowledge that there was, right? And basically he was talking about the need for specialties. And extrapolating on that, and I'm blanking on the exact quote here, but how it connects to this, certainly 10, 20, 30 years ago, it did take 5 to 10 years, right, for that from initial research to management, actual affecting patient management. But look at the speed of information change. There can be a bomb going off in, Hong Kong, and we know immediately. You know what I mean? The flow of information, period, has increased to the point where our practice is changing effectively. I can't help but think that a lot of my conversations about EMS now are through the lens of our conversation with John Moon, too, because Josh, you mentioned, what are we going to think we were doing right currently that we're going to learn that we're doing incorrectly? I want to flip the script a little bit and think, what are we going to be doing now that because of whatever systemic failures we're going to stop doing, right? What do I mean by that? So a lot of and Josh and I know we talked about this a lot of the things that they were doing over at Freedom House was pretty solid medicine, but then something happened. The dark ages of EMS happened, I guess. I don't know. And we fell away from a lot of the good practices that they were doing there. And we're just now starting to do again. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. I don't know. I guess we want to feel that it's linear, but a lot of times I don't think it is.
No, definitely not linear. I think that you mentioned the spread of information and how quick it is. I think social media has freaking propelled this because now it's almost like I'm a big history buff. You know how during the Reformation, the church didn't want the peasants to be able to read the Bible, so it could only be in Latin because they didn't want them to have this information because knowledge is power. And I think that this is a modern day example of that. Before, you had these bodies like the American College of Surgeons and the Emergency Nurses Association, the NAEMT, and the NAEMSE. I'm on their shit list now after today. But you had these bodies that for eons were the stakeholders and the decision makers. And now, yeah, there's a lot of idiots like me that are out there, spewing what I think, saying my opinion. But there's also a lot of smart people who weren't part of these associations, like, the Haiti Malamats, the Scott Weingarts. And, they show like, hey, this guy or girl, they're really freaking smart and they're a professional. And, maybe we should start questioning the way things have been done. So I know
because human nature takes over, though, right? There is no such thing as a true objective collection of information. Human nature will always take over. There will always be in groups and out groups. And what you're describing is if you're not in the in group of X or Y group, your opinion's not going to be accounted for. They're going to say, oh,
Yeah.
that guy, because we don't agree with him or her, we're not going to. And information is certainly a commodity, and it's a commodity that is now much more accessible than it ever has been.
Yeah, you say information is a commodity. You see it. So in EMS, I think you see it when you go to someone that isn't listening to podcasts, isn't part of, doesn't have EMS social media posts in their feed, and you talk about just, I don't know, something that's going on that we're talking about today. Let's just say Esmolol, and they're like, "What? Wait, this drug? What is this drug? What does this do? Or some new thing that's coming about? Not that he listens, but PragMed would love to hear. When Roboa was making its way around social media, that it was going to be the next big thing in EMS. Yeah. And you went and talked to someone, and they were like, Roboa, and then you talk about it, and they're like, you want to do what? And in the way of a commodity, when you do come with this information and it's solid information, it's evidence-based, you've got anecdotal backing to it, and you talk about it, people are like, oh, this person should be listened to. This person I'm going to give my time to, and I'm going to take that information away from them. But if you don't bring that to the table, then unfortunately you're just a head in the crowd.
And I got to say this other thing too. This is definitely going to get us some smoke, but certainly the people that are heading these organizations are, maybe I shouldn't.
Prelude?
I know, right? Certainly there's
a vested interest in not changing things.
Yeah, and maybe they're just not good at the tech. And they, I gotta say, the NAMT certainly probably did not expect the backlash that they were getting when they went up, just pencil whipped a signature on a letter that's saying, "Hey, we don't need paramedic practitioners." Certainly they just maybe aren't as attuned to the interwebs and social media that folks that are younger are. I don't know.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about that. My dad, he was a neurologist for like 40-some, 50 years, and he just retired a year and a half ago. But he said, like, he's great, he's brilliant, but he said that the technology's like, I just can't keep up with it. And he doesn't mean like in a clinical sense. He means like the EMR and the hospital web-based educations that he would have to do. He's like, I can't keep up with this stuff. I really think you hit the nail on the head with that. That is, and I actually, as I've been more like pensive about thinking about this stuff as I get older, and I kind of am starting to see it now with my kids. I have a 7-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 12-year-old, and they look at me with the tech stuff, and I have this podcast. I got this video equipment, the microphones. Like, I think I'm actually doing pretty good. And they look at me like I am an imbecile when it comes to doing this stuff.
I mean, even I don't use TikTok. I don't use what's another one, Josh? I don't know.
You don't use a whole lot of social media.
Yeah, I don't. And I mean, and I'm just like, I don't feel like, I mean, I just turned 30. I'm not that old. And I'm like, but I look at some of my students and I'm like, what are you even talking about? It's like they're talking about a different language. I will say that I'm a huge OpenAI fan, and I've been messing around with a lot of their stuff. But Yeah, I don't know, man. I can't help but think that because of the generational gap in technology, people that are used to having these information silos where they are the power, they just don't have it. And uh, once we stop recording, Mike, I'll go into a little bit more detail. I'm like purposefully being vague here, and I apologize for that. But yeah,
My hospital system's social media is cringe. It is brutal. It's terrible. I'm not talking about politics or anything like that. It's just you look at it and you're like, oh my God, like who posted this? You know, for a multi-billion-dollar organization, this is the best you can do. So one of my coworkers, a young hip female, is on some committee in the hospital now to like increase the social media presence because they're finally starting to realize like, hey, we got to get up with the now. And she said a big problem that these organizations have isn't just with the tech and understanding how it works. That whole generation thing is definitely at play. She said, but so many places are hesitant to get on board because they're consulting lawyers. And
bingo.
it's like,
Yes,
no,
yes,
you can't
yes.
post that. No, you can't comment on that. No, you can't. And I told her, and she's like, I'm going to use this at the next meeting. I said, running a social media post past an attorney is like running the agenda for a bachelor party past a bishop. Like, it's just going to suck. There's not going to be a good, like a good product.
I mean, and a lot of time, I hate to say this, but again, my anecdotal experience, when you have someone that's litigating off of the 1970s world,
Yes.
they just don't get it. They just don't get it. I've had an attorney ask me why we need an EMS application. They're like, why can't you just open a book? And I'm like, when I have a coding kid, I'd much rather just look at an app and calculate a drug dose on my phone instead of like, rifling through a textbook just to like, make sure I'm not like giving the incorrect. Obviously, I should know the dose anyway, duh. But, I just don't get there when folks are litigating against a different generation. It's a goes back to the same point we just made. They're just not. I mean, the reality is information exchange is changing to these new platforms, and we have to keep up.
Yeah.
And plain and simple, that's why we're here. We're trying to bring this information via podcast, via social media, our page, Mike's page, trying to get it out there and identify with those generations that we have a hard time identifying with ourselves at times, and listening to and being able to understand, but still like getting something out there that is bite-sized information that's going to make them want to learn more and have that information, a commodity, so that they can pass it on to their coworkers. You know, be that, the engineering of like change. I guess that be the wheels of change, and I think that's what is driving a lot of change in EMS is that we're now getting buy-in by the lowest level field provider because they are seeing what's happening and they want to get involved and they want to know more, and they're like, well, why aren't we talking about this? Why is my agency still hasn't gotten on board with video laryngoscopy? Perfect one. I commented on something today. Scope of knowledge, EMS scope of knowledge. I'm sorry if I butchered your handle. I'll make sure not to do it again in the future. But they've made a post about what do you prefer, DL or VL, and it was 55% VL and 44% DL. And it was like, whoa, we are in 2023. Why is that DL number so high? And it's because, one, probably agencies don't have it, the money for it, but people aren't talking about it. And now this is getting that conversation going, like, hey, EMS administrator, hey, supervisor, hey, captain, chief, whoever, why don't we have this? Why don't we have this piece of equipment that here's all the data. We offer it to you. It shows first pass success rates go up.
Yeah, I've seen this in the medical direction realm as well. So it used to be you would say to your medical director, let's get ketamine, and the medical director would say, no, and here's like X, Y, and Z for why we're not going to get ketamine. And you would go, all right, they're the medical director. You know, they know. Certainly, I mean, I'm not knocking the doctors. They have much more schooling than I do, 100%. But as you said, the lowest level of field provider can now go, well, doc, I understand that, but here's these 14 blogs I read, and I printed them out. And, you know, I went on PubMed, and I looked at the studies that they reference, and I looked at those citations. And you make a point, but this stuff doesn't kind of jive with that. And I've been in that situation, being that guy with the medical director, and the director goes like, now, you know, you could have the old guy in Pennsylvania who would just be like, F you, I'm a doctor, you're nothing. Just take that approach. But I've had good medical directors who were like, you know what? I don't agree with you. I'm not going to do this in my practice. But you make a really good point. And ketamine is the thing I'm talking about. This is kind of the battle we did to get ketamine a few years ago. The doc was like, I don't like using ketamine. I'm not going to use it, but you guys did your homework. You can use ketamine. It's like, I'm going to QA the shit out of it. He said, but you guys could use it. And we proved that we do a good job with it. So now he's totally on board with it.
Yeah, certainly they used to be the information holders, because let's not forget that journals used to be published only on paper, and the only people that could afford it were physicians, right? So let's not forget about that either. Now,
100%.
Even if you, number one, they have online publications of pre-hospital emergency care, so on and so forth. But even if you don't have I don't have a subscription to pre-hospital emergency care, but I guarantee you, if there's anything at all worthwhile getting published, then there's a number of pages that I follow, or I have colleagues that are going to bring it up. You know, and that's certainly that, again, information as a commodity. More people, like just like Josh said, at the lowest level. And I shouldn't say lowest. The folks on the ground doing the work have a lot more access than they ever had to that, information.
Yeah. Yeah.
John,
and it's making better providers.
Mike, I got to ask you, man. I got two questions I want to ask you. Number one, what are your thoughts on pre-hospital ultrasound?
I'll never say never. I will never say never, but I do routinely shit on ultrasound. I personally don't see where it's going to change anything. I guess you could make the argument that if you're in Montana, and do you go 4 hours to the hospital the patient wants to go to, or do you go 4 hours to a trauma center after they fell and you want to do a fast exam? Okay. I know Newcastle County, by me, where I live, they are doing ultrasound strictly to terminate cardiac arrests. That sounds good. Like, there's nothing wrong with it, really, but is it worth the investment? Because in 22 years of doing this is anecdote, I know, but I cannot think of, I have brought countless cardiac arrest patients to the hospital where they've put an ultrasound probe on and they go, yep, they're dead. I have never seen one go like, oh, look, the heart's actually moving a little bit. Like, no, they're dead. You know,
the abundance of times I've seen as well. The only one I've seen was actually a week and a half ago. There was a massive PE. It wasn't going to do anything. The guy had multiple comorbidities, massive, probably saddle PE. But you actually could watch the blood circulate in the ventricles, just swirl around with these little bits of plaque. And it's like, well, this isn't going to go anywhere. And
I guess
we use it in cardiac arrest too, but it's for carotid blood flow, and that's it. We can use it for TOR. And not to delve away from Moose's second question, but I ran into one of the battalion chiefs last night, and he goes, so what do you think we should do going forward with this? I said, well, I don't think there's any worth in fast exams. They're cool. They take a lot of training, and they're not going to change anything for us. I think the only use outside of cardiac arrest for us in EMS right now, not to say it's going to change, because we just talked about how fast this stuff changes. Lung sliding for your tension pneumos and maybe guiding your needle. But that reached into another topic that I'm really happy for, that if he gets on board with, will be amazing. And undifferentiated respiratory distress.
Actually, a listener today sent me a DM of a case. He was like, I know you hate POCUS. He goes, and I don't hate POCUS. I have always said that I don't see how it changes anything in EMS, and I think it's a lot of mental masturbation for people. However, I am not closed-minded to it, and I will be the first person to say I was wrong and say, all right, you guys were right, if it does indeed to be, something that changes outcomes. But I did have a follower today send me a DM with a picture of the ultrasound. He said it was an undifferentiated respiratory distress patient. And he was like, look at this clear curly B lines that you could see. And I was like, well, I could see the use there for it. So TBD.
Yeah, exactly. But it's one of those things that we're still figuring out in our realm. It's still being figured out in the hospital. Like, there's people that specialize in this stuff, and that's all they do. And even docs that go to course after course still have issues. I remember my critical care instructor was like, yeah, I carry one, I have one. But I'll tell you, it took me hours upon hours upon hours of instruction in classes to get any good at this thing.
Christiana has a whole emergency medicine fellowship for ultrasound. I mean, that tells you how intricate it is.
Yeah.
You see, I'm kind of with you, Mike. I'm like, this is going to sound terrible.
Bring it.
But
I couldn't piss any more people off today, so.
And I don't mean to. I want to make sure that my paramedic knows where the liver versus the spleen is before I put an ultrasound probe in their hand. And yes, that's a little bit of hyperbole, but I want to make sure that we're sending home the basics. If we're going to spend time training our folks on, if we're going to spend time on ultrasound, which, again, I'm not against it. I'm for ultrasound, but I'm also, if I will be for an advanced practice paramedic who has to have a lot more education before I will be for an ultrasound skill as a regular thing. I don't give a shit if my paramedic can find the rare, if they can do a fast exam on the side of the road, if they don't know what they're looking at. I think ultrasound is becoming one of those things where we're pushing back towards the direction of technicians versus clinicians because we're sending those readings to other people. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying we don't need medical leadership and medical oversight, but goddamn, folks, like, let's get the basics under control and let's elevate the practice so that it's not a debate if we can do any advanced skill, let alone ultrasound. I don't get it. I don't know where it came from. I'm totally for it. Yeah, good.
Mm-hmm. I spent some time with a EMS chief from out west, and he was telling me about all this stuff their department can do. Oh my God, you name it. Just stuff you would never even think of, and you're like, oh my God, like how many of these do you do a year? First off, but like also, as much as I like crap on the medical directors, they are there for oversight. You have to ask sometimes, like, what medical director is allowing this? And how good is your medical director and how involved are they? If they're just like, oh yeah, that's fine, go ahead and do it. But then, I'm hearing all these stories of how like the department streets are paved with gold and then I start hearing about screw ups on basic calls. And it's like, you guys are so focused on trying to be the best and getting up here that your people are screwing up and like telling the chest pain patient, oh, it's just indigestion. You probably don't need to go to the hospital. Your 12 lead was fine.
Yeah. No, dude. I exactly. Like, I don't know, man. You gotta. I'm excited to see where ultrasound goes in the next 10 years, but the way I see it, and this is going to be a little bit controversial too, leading into my second question, things like RSI, things like ultrasound, things like name an advanced skill should be done by an advanced practice paramedic practitioner who has the clinical education and experience to be able to safely perform those skills. So that's my second question to you. What are your thoughts on all the paramedic practitioner stuff going on?
I like the paramedic practitioner as you described it. And that guy, Dave Pfeiffer, is going to have a freaking cow when he heard me say that I agree, that because I did a whole thing about how I don't agree in the paramedic practitioner. But I do like that. I think Canada's like that with the different levels of paramedic. And I know Texas has different levels of credentialing, but somewhat.
Yeah, it's a piece of paper, but Austin, Texas is the one that has like the specific.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There are not many, but there are paramedics out there that if my dad was having chest pain and that paramedic responded to him, or my mom was having a CHF exacerbation, they're going to do fine. You know, like parents are in good hands. If they're my partner on a family trapped under a tractor trailer who've got to RSI a kid, I'm going, oh my God, why am I partnered with this guy tonight? I don't want him being my partner on this. There are some medics, and medics will tell you this, like, oh, you know, I'm good to a point. Yeah, I think for those high risk, low volume procedures, I think a little bit of extra credentialing is a good thing. I really do.
And there has to be that critical mass of experience, right? That's the biggest, one of the biggest things I say. But no amount of experience is going to get you good medical education, but no amount of medical education is going to get you the lessons you learn from like 10 years of experience, right? You have to have both. And I think that's what PAs were supposed to be. I think when they started, they were supposed to be these combat veterans that were coming back and they had that experience. Now it's like, oh man.
There's pre-PA program.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest. There's pre-PA program in their PE program. Like my secondary alma mater and the school that you went to as well, Moose, and I think you're doing your master's through.
Yeah.
Has a pre-PA program.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so it's not people that are highly experienced. You know, when my dad got into his program, don't quote me on this, and I've said this before, I think he had 36,000 hours of patient contact as a paramedic and a corpsman in the Navy. And at the time, a lot of people in the class had, you know, bountiful experience. Nothing like that. But now it's people that are coming straight out of undergrad. You know, maybe they get their year or two of experience being a scribe or a tech.
Or like what blew my, like I worked as a pharmacy technician at CVS and that counted. And I'm like, what? I literally filled medication all day and had people yell at me. That's literally what I did for while I was
money making for these universities. It's the same with NPs. My wife will tell you, she's a nurse practitioner. She said now it's your 23-year-old nurse graduates from undergrad and goes right to NP school. And she said when she went 7 or 8 years ago, there were morons that they were pushing through. She's like, this one student in particular, she's like, I know she's getting 40s on the tests. She's like, because I see it. Mm-hmm. And she got pushed through.
And in this world, in that world that we're describing right now, one of the top advocates for our profession is saying, we don't need a paramedic practitioner. Go be a PA or an NP. That just blows my mind. You have
I kind of agree with that. I agree with the practitioner as you outlined it.
Yeah.
The advanced procedures. Now, what they want to do and give people an NPI and you can hang a shingle and see patients and prescribe drugs, I think that would be a freaking disaster.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So I guess the way I think about it is, so I went to England a couple years ago. Well, I mean, I got a ton of family in England, and I posted on Reddit. I said, "Hey, I'm a paramedic from the United States. Any paramedics want to meet up? We'll trade patches and talk." And we did, and that's sort of the way they described how they run. Is they will then they'll not FaceTime. They'll do whatever technology they use to talk to an advanced practitioner, and then they'll be able to refuse the patient, right, and then write them scripts or whatever. So I kind of see it in that capacity. I certainly agree with you. I don't think there would be space for like a. Are you describing like a brick and mortar place for paramedic practitioners? Like I certainly would not be cool with that. No, I would not be cool with that. I mean, that certainly goes outside of the scope, I think, of EMS practitioners. Yeah. What I do see a function at, because it's a unique, we have a unique skill set, but we also have that the walls of our skill set. I see MIH. I see it. Mobile integrated health. I see value there.
Oh yeah, definitely, 100%.
I see value in going to the patient instead of the patient coming to us as a practitioner. Yeah, and for advanced skills, I think there's benefit in having it, kind of like what I already said, a small core group of people that do the skills more often than giving it to anyone and everyone.
Yeah, and I think that would be the same with MIH. If you want to have these community paramedics or whatever you want to call them, they're going to have that advanced skill set that the run-of-the-mill 911 line paramedic doesn't have. Like, you got an abscess on your ass. We'll come to your house. We'll check you out. No, you don't need to go to the ER for it. Here, we'll draw some cultures. We'll swab a culture. A paramedic can certainly do that and put it in a bag to send to the lab. And in the meantime, here's a broad spectrum antibiotic to start. This is what our protocol is to give to you while we're waiting for the cultures. Something like that, I think, is totally feasible and I think would have a lot of value. But this whole I think that we should be like nurses and PAs. There needs to be something for us. Like, I don't think we're there yet.
I think there needs to be something unique, certainly. Maybe that's something where we disagree. I think there certainly has to be something unique to EMS, and it should not be NPs or PAs, because people are always describing, oh, well, we have so many people leaving the field. Well, no shit. Bad working conditions, a bunch of mental health crap, coupled with not having too much upward movement. Of course, that's going to happen. But yeah, no, I mean, I think we're agreeing though. There's a time and place, and what I don't want is the folks that are a little bit too squirrely getting a hold of this, because then I think we go into what you're describing, which is just ineffective utilization.
Yeah, and I know you did your episode on this September, and you brought up a great point. Like, I'm on board with paramedic. I would love to have another level to move towards. I try and educate myself. I try and go find. I went to critical care when I'm not even in a critical care job, just because I wanted to expand my mind. But what you brought up is that we don't even have a good basis in most places around the country. Most initial education is not preparing people to do the basic job. And so how can we expect that then some of these programs create a master's level course that is going to push them through just like they pushed them through the initial training, and now we're going to get this knowledge skill dilution at this quasi higher level of provider?
To be clear, that's not a reason to not do it. That's a reason for us to be more critical on how we do things, right?
Yes.
So
and how we do it all together.
Exactly.
Not just how do we do the higher level stuff. Let's figure out how we do the lower level initial training, and how do we make a good provider that, hey, they don't want to move on to this thing, but they can still do a damn good job. The person you want showing up for you, your family, or as Mike said, the guy that's helping them out with the family that's crushed underneath the 18-wheeler.
I mean, and part of this is, and I would love to get your guys' thoughts on this. I mean, we're still going off of like a DOT national guideline, right? I mean, sure, has clinical input from physicians and everything, but like,
well, obviously, an agency that allots highway funding should be covering EMS. I mean, that's just logical.
We
spend so much time on the road, so it makes sense, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We're just so stuck in the past. Like, that damn white paper in 1966 talked about highway injuries, and god damn it, we're still functioning off of that logic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When everything else in pre-hospital, don't get me wrong, that white paper I want to frame and put on my wall. That was huge for us. But damn, it's been so long since we, EMS is not only these trauma, right? And I don't know, man. I just
well, listen here. I'm getting a text from my wife asking if I'm going to cook the kids dinner.
Oh man. Well, that might be our sign to finish up, man.
Yeah,
I love this. This is great.
Yeah, I love this, and the original what is it, basis of this episode we covered, and then we went right into
Esmolol.
Oh yeah, that is
Esmolol.
what we do.
Then we solved the world's problems.
Dude, this has been a pleasure, man. You can come back anytime. I think it'd be cool.
Oh
if you
no,
come
likewise.
on.
I'd love to have you guys on. This is great. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Definitely would really want Ken and Cody here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
They would have loved this. They're gonna hate having that in here.
Oh no, I'll totally come back. I mean, we could even meet up sometime. I can drive to Maryland. It's only an hour away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Well, let's finish out the show and then let's talk real quick.
Right,
I don't want any of your personal details recorded. No kidding.
Yeah, you're good.
Josh, you want to finish this out, bud?
Yeah, sure. So, Mike, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Great talk.
Yeah.
Went down a massive rabbit hole that is massively important, honestly. For all of our listeners out there, I hope you're having a good evening, good morning, good night, afternoon, whatever time you're listening. Make sure to follow our Instagram, AlertMedic1. Always new content coming out, reels, posts. Make sure, if you're not already, which you should be, you're following OK Medic Podcast as well, World Okayest Medic. On Instagram as well, YouTube, TikTok, Spotify, everywhere. He's got his fingers everywhere. Give him a listen, give him a follow, give him a watch. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. Be safe. Have a good night, good evening, good morning. See you.